Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a scalable, full-stack monitoring platform. Datadog synthetic monitoring enables you to detect front-end errors and performance errors by analyzing user sessions and receiving actionable alerts. API tests help you detect and debug user-facing issues in critical endpoints and applications. Build and deploy self-maintaining browser tests to simulate user journeys from global locations. Start proactively monitoring your user experience today with a free 14-day trial of Datadog by visiting datadog.com/frontend-cloudcast. That's datadog.com/frontend-cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as we record this, it is January of 2023. I still can't believe I'm saying that. This is Aaron this week for Cloud News. I'm going to jump right into Cloud News and then just a couple articles, short Cloud News this week. Then we're going to jump into our look ahead for AI and ML for 2023. So, first article is a funding round. And actually, I have some questions, and maybe some folks out there can help me out a little bit with this. And if you have an opinion on this or can help me out with the logic behind it, let me know. show@thecloudcast.net. But Chronosphere, in the observability space, has raised another $115 million at a $1.6 billion valuation. And I know I've joked on here before. Seems like everyone's a unicorn these days. So, the fact that it's at a 1 billion plus evaluation isn't even that big of a deal or that surprising. But what has me maybe scratching my head a little bit about this one is the fact that they had already raised $228 million, but they went from $28 million to $200 million Series C, and had a $1 billion valuation last year. And they're announcing an extension of the Series C, not a Series D, but an extension of a Series C and an extension of a funding round from over a year ago. So taking in more money, calling it a C round, increasing the valuation. I don't know. That sounds like a D round to me. But apparently that's not what we're calling it anymore. So like I said, if anybody can explain that one, let me know, because that one has me scratching my head a little bit. But the observability space, there's lots of folks in this space. Datadog, of course, AppDynamics, New Relic, Dynatrace. There's even the open source things that are out there, OpenTelemetry, Prometheus. So it is an extremely crowded space. So this feels to me like, as we kind of said in our 2022 predictions for 2023, there's going to be some down rounds coming. So maybe they were grabbing cash while they could at a higher valuation and storing that in the bank. That's what this feels like to me. Moving on to our second article, and also goes into some of our predictions, was we're going to start to see some companies get acquired. It's certainly an acceleration of that. And Fungible, if you follow Fungible, they were in the DPU space. They were acquired by Microsoft. Now, very little about this, which makes me think this is an acqui-hire. Microsoft is already had a DPU product or was already working on something, and this feels like something enhancing the existing products, getting something into Azure, beefing up the Azure product line. Going forward. So I think this tech is just going to be absorbed into Azure, and it won't necessarily live on as a product. But again, opinion of Aaron based off of a teeny tiny little blog that announced it. Also, prices weren't disclosed or any kind of features like that. So that closes out Cloud News for this week. And coming up right after the break, we're going to be doing our next look ahead show. We're going to be doing a look ahead into artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we're bringing back Sam Charrington from the TWIMLAI podcast for that.
It's our mission to give IT pros a break. So here it is. wish it was longer. But to keep saving IT pros time and money, we only paid for a 30-second ad. From racks and PDUs to backup power, Eaton and TRIPLIGHT have joined forces to bring more sanity to your day every day. Visit eaton.com/audio today.
And we're back. And, as we mentioned at the top of the show, this week is going to be another one of the really awesome looking ahead to 2023 shows. Hopefully you all have enjoyed the shows so far. We've had a couple out there. Aaron, these are always, I feel like, I don't want to say these are our best shows of the year, but these are the ones we really, they're good shows, but they're the ones we really get a chance to dig into things. Because I think we abstract them a little bit. I think we take some big topics and we really abstract them a little bit.
Yeah. And for this show, we're going to be talking about AI and ML. And we're asking previous guests from many look aheads here, it seems like. So Sam Charrington from the TWIMLAI AI podcast. So first of all, Sam, how are you doing? And welcome back to the show.
Hey guys, I am doing great. Super excited to be on the show, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Sam, first of all, so like I said, we've been doing these look aheads for years, and we pick some trends and topics we think are going to be important in the upcoming year. And I would say you're probably repeat offender, depending on how you look at it, right? Your shows have always been very positively received, and your podcast is also positively received. And by the way, link is in the show notes. If you don't listen to the TWIMLAI podcast, please go do. But let's get started. For those that maybe don't listen to that, give everyone a little bit about the breadth of things you're doing over the TWIMLAI AI, and how do people get involved with something like that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can definitely subscribe to the podcast. That is a big focus of ours. We just recently crossed 600 shows. We've been doing it for about 6 years now. In addition to the podcast itself, we host an annual conference called TWIMLCon, as well as online events throughout the year. We host a learning community. These are folks that want to learn about various topics in ML and AI. That's accessible via our website as well. That's TWIMLAI.com. And in addition to all of that, I am also kind of think of myself as an industry analyst. I publish research in the form of ebooks and articles also on the website. One of the big focus areas for that is ML ops, but as well broader areas in ML and AI and some of the generative AI stuff that we'll be talking a bit about today.
Yeah, we're gonna dive into a bunch of stuff. I want to ask this question because we get asked sort of similar stuff, especially for people that are either new to the podcast or even new to the domain. You've covered a lot of things in 600 shows in 6 years. If you were talking to somebody new to the space, new grad, or just somebody who's like, oh, I've been around technology or IT, and I've heard great things about the show. I want to sort of dive into it. Do you have a kind of a, here's where I would tell someone new to start? Like, your website, way beyond ours, is so much easier to sort of, organize things. But if somebody was new to it, do you just tell them to sort of jump in and start listening to things? Are there some basic things that you tell them to start with, for folks that are newer to this space?
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about websites earlier, but we revamped our website this past year. And one of the things that we're really excited about is we've got we publish these topics so that folks can dig into individual topics that they're interested in, and those topics could be things like computer vision or reinforcement learning or any of the subfields in AI. And we also are able to publish playlists on the show, and one of those playlists we have is new to the pod. So for folks who are new to the podcast, some of our, what we think of as most accessible and kind of broadest interest shows. And in fact, I was just chatting with my producer about updating that for 2023. So we've got some great shows in that collection, that playlist, including an interview with Andrew Ng. I think there's one with Michael Jordan, who's a Berkeley professor, Timnit Gebru, who is a ethical AI researcher, and many others.
Awesome.
Nice. That's fantastic. So Sam, let me ask you this. Let's kind of jump into some of the recent headlines. There's things out there around Stable Diffusion and ChatGPT, and also too, we'll highlight the recent podcast you did specifically with ChatGPT. So definitely want to talk about that a little bit. But for those that aren't necessarily around this space every day, it feels like towards the end of the year in 2022, we had some huge leaps in usability over previous years. And so, I mean, is that what you saw? Do you see a big jump in AI at the end of 2022, or was this just some good UI design that came out? Or tell us a little bit about how this came to be.
It's a really, really interesting way to put the question. I think it's both of those things. In this space, as I guess is the case with other spaces in tech, it's, what you see in any given day is kind of the result of an incremental innovation process. But also, I think that we did experience some inflection point this year in terms of usability and accessibility and performance even. And Stable Diffusion and ChatGPT are great examples of this. So in the case of Stable Diffusion, that the innovation path there is, come from GANs, which were a big deal in like 2018, 2019. You may remember there was this website, This Person Does Not Exist, which was essentially a collection of synthetically generated faces. That was all the rave then. And then in 21, like we all lost our minds over DALL-E 1, which was creating images from text prompts. But then DALL-E 2, early last year raised the bar significantly due to some technical innovation. This concept of latent diffusion that we don't need to get into. And likewise on the Stable Diffusion, or rather with Stable Diffusion, they took all of that innovation and then made it so that you can access it via Discord bot, which, and that's when you saw it blow up on Twitter, right? I think a similar thing has happened with ChatGPT. So, ChatGPT blew our minds, GPT-3 blew our minds in 2020. Like people were doing all kinds of crazy experiments like, hey, ChatGPT, make me a website, and the thing would generate HTML. It was crazy. ChatGPT before that was pretty impressive. Earlier last spring, OpenAI released this InstructGPT paper, which made it so that you can more easily kind of tell GPT what you wanted it to create. And then ChatGPT came out with a pretty basic UI on top of that, and a hell of a lot of server scaling capability. And, that has blown everyone's minds once again. So I think it's a combination of, both innovation as well as usability and accessibility that's really made it feel like, we're at a significant point in AI.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you've said this before in the past, like whenever AI has this tendency, and maybe it's just the people around it tendency where like the goalposts shift, right? Like what we think is amazing is really just sort of a shifting of stuff. And it's, it started off, I think you used the example in the past of like, hey, you're typing into Gmail and it starts trying to autocomplete stuff. Okay, that's kind of a thing. And then we forget that that's amazing. And then we move on to the next thing. I'm curious, like, especially with the stuff again, like just in the last couple of weeks, like, do you, for somebody who lives and breathes this stuff all the time, do you feel like, are you like, wow, that was really big? Or, that was just the next sort of logical step with a little more focus on sort of user experience? Like, are you blown away with it?
I feel like I had that same moment with ChatGPT as everyone else. It really blew my mind. I kind of thought of myself as a very explicit chatbot hater. Like, this was my first experience with a chatbot that did not absolutely suck. And so I spent a bunch of time playing with it, kind of around the same time as everyone else, and it really did blow my mind to the point that I had this idea that Aaron alluded to earlier, like, could I interview this thing like about itself? And I did that, and it did not, it didn't let me down. It did not, I was kind of expecting that, as was the case with my experience with GPT-3, like, it was impressive in tightly controlled environments, but if you wanted to make it, if you wanted to use it, you really had to spend a lot of time with, what they call prompt engineering, like really structuring your prompt in a very particular way to kind of coerce the model into producing the kind of output that you wanted it to produce. Not to mention like parameters like temperature and all these other things that you had to twiddle with to get the output right. But ChatGPT, it just kind of worked to the extent that, I opened up the window and said, hey, I'm a podcaster and you're ChatGPT. I'm going to interview you now about yourself with the objective of helping people learn, more about you and how you work. And it was like, okay, cool, let's go. And then I asked it a question and it answered it, and we just kept going. And we took that output and ran it through this tool called Synthesia, which allows you to take text and create an avatar basically from that text. It does text to speech to vocalize it, and it also will it'll take the image of a face and kind of move its lips according to the text. And so we kind of brought this thing to life, and we're able to publish a video podcast interview of me interviewing a bot. It still blows my mind. It's very cool.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I didn't know there was a visual component to all of it. I listened to the audio, and I had no idea until you just said that there was actually a visual component to all of that as well. Huh, that's interesting.
The thing that has interested me about that is that when you read the comments, and some researchers kind of get really really wigged out, to use a technical term, about the kind of anthropomorphization of AI.
Sure.
And that it kind of, leads people to impart sentience to these things or whatever. And indeed, in the YouTube comments, you'll see people, it was really crazy when she said X, Y, Z. I used the default avatar on this tool, and it is a female avatar, female voice. And I found it interesting that people very readily kind of applied the characteristics of the avatar to the thing, as opposed to saying it. They'd refer to it as a he or she.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And let me ask, so just thinking about this too, is part of this and why this kind of blew up as big as it did is, when we've talked about this in the past, and Brian and I have talked about this off show too, one of the big things with AI and ML, I think, is a little bit of use cases we can identify with. And what I mean by that is like, hey, there might be AI and ML used in like industrial settings or with a bunch of model training or, doing some, and it was like kind of hard to wrap our heads around because it wasn't necessarily as practical. But something like this is, very simple use case. Everyone can relate to it. Does that play into why it went as big as it did?
I think it does, and in fact, that's really been the case for me as well. Um, I've got a very small business, a micro business, if you will, and you know, I can't really do churn analysis or not create a churn predictor for my customers. Like it doesn't work like that for a business of my scale. There were when I think about kind of ways to apply AI, and I've thought about this for 6 years, like it was hard to apply a lot of the things that I would talk about on the podcast to my business. But with Chat GPT, Stable Diffusion, some other things that have come along recently. OpenAI Whisper is a voice to text model that was released in the past year. Like all of a sudden, I've got a ton of ideas about how to apply some of these to what I do and to apply them in conjunction with one another to do cool things. We were talking about websites earlier. I imagine the next version of our website, I'll no longer have to scour the web for blog post featured images, right? It's just going to use Stable Diffusion and come up with a cool featured image on its own. Responding to emails, like we get a little bit of that in Gmail today and in Google Docs, like it'll suggest a word or two, but I think we're going to see much richer suggestions, kind of a la ChatGPT, GPT-3 in the near future. And there are already apps that you can use, things like Copy AI and Jarvis to generate text for you, like to help you write blog posts, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think it's much more accessible.
Yeah, no, I've already heard, especially even in the small business space, people are talking about it in these huge cases. But like, I've heard of folks who are like, look, I have a neighbor or a friend or who, let's say, I'm trying to think of the example was like, he runs a landscaping business and, English is not his first language, and he gets questions from people or he gets questions on, Nextdoor or whatever, and he's not always sure how to respond. And he's like, I created a system that just sort of says like, cut and paste whatever it is into here. It will go into like ChatGPT, give you a good, proper sounding, English as a first language response. And he's using it to help this guy like just expand his business because, language is a barrier, but like, doing the job is not a barrier. So like, It's going to be interesting to see all these interesting kind of nuances, like you said, whether you're a big business or a little business. I think it's going to be very cool.
Yeah, that does raise for me some concerns. Like, I think, what ChatGPT is really good at today is like it generates very coherent text. I'm sure you see, and it can generate coherent text about a very broad range of topics. Like you could ask it to talk about anything and it'll find a way to talk about them. We'll come back to that. And even in relatively long dialogues, like there's pretty strong consistency between turns. Like if you say something and you can continue to build on in a very conversational way the thing you said before, and it will continue to refine its responses, and it doesn't just like forget what you said a couple of responses ago. And so I think that is those things are big contributors to like what makes it so impressive to interact with. At the same time, it is prone to what is the technical term is hallucination. The colloquial term is bullshitting. It will just make stuff up. In fact, I was just prompting it for one of the technical things in ChatGPT that and kind of thinking about this kind of series of innovations that got us from GPT-3 to ChatGPT, one of the things is this idea of RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback. Paper that OpenAI came out with that kind of showed how they used that technique to create this Instruct GPT thing that I mentioned. Well, I asked ChatGPT to provide a kind of high-level explanation for that. And it said that RLHF was regularized leaderboard human following. Total bullshit.
Wow. Yeah.
And so like in this example with someone, who doesn't speak the language, like if you're not paying attention and don't have some knowledge of the thing that it's, talking about, how do you recognize that? Right.
Yeah.
The old subject matter expert kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Now, OpenAI is working really hard to build guardrails to try to prevent abuse, and to I suspect over time they'll be working hard to figure out ways to either let you know how confident it is in its responses, or to weed out responses that don't meet some confidence bar or something like that. But that's a big concern. There's also concerns around bias, like this thing is trained on an internet's worth of text. Well, an internet's worth of text has an internet's worth of shitty stuff in it from a bias perspective. And fairness and things like that. And so, that's a concern. Plagiarism and spam are kind of off-cited, risks of systems like these being readily available. And, go on YouTube and type ChatGPT and you'll find, hey, I, created 100 blog posts in 10 minutes with ChatGPT. Like, I don't want to read those blog posts.
Yeah. Hey,
right?
I want to shift gears a little bit. You're both a technologist, but also an analyst, which means you care about the numbers and things, kind of the economics of behind things. With some of these things like OpenAI, which is, we've seen some numbers, like it's pretty expensive to run. There's various people that have funded it, and what are you starting to see as to what those guys think their business model would look like? Is it like we want to be the center of everything runs through like an OpenAI? Do they expect to do a lot of like, oh, we're gonna we're gonna not outsource stuff, but like embed stuff into other services? Like, are you getting any sense of this is this really powerful thing, but again, behind the scenes, it's pretty expensive because there's lots of compute. But like, have you gotten any sense of what the the ecosystem around something as powerful as we can use ChatGPT, but any of these services, what they might start to look like?
Yeah, the way OpenAI is positioning their business model thus far is that you pay essentially per API invocation, right? So GPT-3 sits behind an API. You give it some text and some parameters, and it'll send you back a response. And ChatGPT is not yet available via an API, but one can imagine that there will at some point soon be a ChatGPT API, and it's the same kind of thing. You maybe give it a prompt, an initial prompt, and it'll send you back like a session token and a response, and you keep referring to that session token and kind of continue to build this dialogue that it tracks for you. And they'll charge you, I forget what it is for ChatGPT, 0.4 cents or something like that per API invocation, or whatever the number is. And I think the interesting thing there is that their a significant part of their investment is this kind of the upfront training, and all the research, of course, that goes into, knowing what to train and how to train it. But the training of these models is, huge, hundreds of millions of dollar investments, right? You're essentially crawling all of the text on the internet and training a gigantic model, on all of that text. And so from that perspective, it's, it's in their interest to, kind of tightly gate access to this thing, limit the ways that it can be used in terms of, they've got the way that they think about the API and the way you should use it. And that's the way you get to use it because, it's their model, it's behind their API. There's a whole other school of thought, which is that these types of models, what have come to be called foundation models, should be open source and freely available. This is the if you kind of think about OpenAI being in one camp, the other camp would be represented maybe by Stable Diffusion. I recently interviewed Imad Mostak, who's the founder and CEO of Stable Diffusion. Very good interview that I would suggest you take a listen to. Their whole take on this is that, these models are too important to be controlled by a single company, and so they should be open source. Stable Diffusion is one of the supporters of this project or company called Eleuther AI. They have a model called GPT Neo, or GPT Neo X is the newer one, that is meant to be like a GPT clone, but open source. And so I think, that's going to be kind of the tension in the OpenAI, business model, right? Are they going to be able to continue to, right now, the GPT Neo is kind of lagging behind OpenAI. They kind of take what they do and kind of replicate it in open source. In a lot of ways, like Stable Diffusion came after OpenAI's DALL-E and DALL-E 2, and is kind of an open source version of that same idea. But interestingly enough, like there was no access to no open access or API based access to DALL-E 2 before Stable Diffusion came around. And who knows what their schedule is, but I think a lot of people think that the availability of Stable Diffusion kind of forced their hand and pushed them to make DALL-E access happen quicker than they might otherwise have done. And so it's kind of playing out in the AI world, kind of an open source versus closed source theme that we've seen for many years in cloud and other aspects of software. And I think that whole dynamic's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And so let me ask you this, Sam, because I almost think about it. There's a couple different islands or a couple different camps. Like if I just want to get started, I want my company to get started and look at something like this. Like I see there's the foundational models, the Stable Diffusion and ChatGPTs and some of these other things that I could take advantage of. There's services in public clouds, like, I don't know, like Google Cloud and some of the AI services that they call. And then there's the typical build it yourself kind of thing as well. And yeah, it's like, we've seen all these models before kind of thing. Where do you see companies going? Like, where are the barriers to entry? What services are the most adoptable, or what applications or use cases are you seeing? Like, if we step back from the Stable Diffusion and ChatGPT for a moment, what are companies really doing in 2022 and 2023? Like, and does that take a lot of engineers? Is that a big budget? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think there is pretty broad recognition now that use cases for machine learning are kind of far and wide. There are, a ton of them. Put any area of your business. If you're a large company, put any area of your business, on a dartboard or spreadsheet and throw a dart at it, and there's a use case for ML and AI there somewhere. And the questions are, then do you have the data to to essentially allow you to train a model? Do you have the team, with the skills to do it? Do you have the infrastructure in place to do it? All those kinds of things. One thing that I think that we've seen over the past year, maybe two, is that it's just been in the traditional realm, kind of hey, I'm going to build a model myself, right? Or, my team, we're going to build the model. There's been a huge proliferation of tools over the past few years. This is all stuff that kind of generally goes under the banner of ML ops. There are tons of different tools for, many different types of use cases, everything from collecting and managing your data to, training your models more efficiently and managing your experiments and deploying those models. Tools that are end-to-end that do all of those things, tools that are kind of specialized and focus on particular areas. So I think that's one thing that has changed the getting started landscape, for those folks that are looking to kind of build models for specific areas of their business, is the proliferation of tools. And that's not even including the cloud vendor offerings, which have, advanced significantly over the past few years and are very broad and rich, feature rich nowadays. And so, if you're a company that uses that's in the cloud and has a preferred cloud vendor, that preferred cloud vendor, if they're one of the big three, has an AI suite, a machine learning suite. Typically, those suites include AI services that are kind of models that are behind APIs, kind of akin to what we were talking about with OpenAI earlier. Then there's and those services are typically targeting developers that are not data scientists, and that aren't necessarily focused on ML and AI, but they can, consume these services and use models that are trained by the cloud vendor. For example, object detection. You give me, you submit an image to the model, and it will, return bounding boxes for objects or identify the objects in the model, or you give it text and it'll identify parts of speech. Like, there are tons of these services at that layer. The middle layer of these stacks are typically focused on, and actually that what I just described, I should have described as like the top layer. The middle layer of these stacks are typically focused on the data scientist. And these are kind of machine learning IDEs, you can think of them as. And these tools allow you to kind of train models based on your own data, and then use those models within your software, deploy them, make them available behind endpoints, and access them via your software. And at the low level, there's more infrastructure, like accessing GPUs and custom ML silicon for low level training. And these are used by data scientists also, but like with particular sets of needs. So the tooling availability has really matured over the past couple of years, and that's taken a big chunk out of the difficulty to get started.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to see, especially given, the resources around finding data scientists and so forth. You want an easy path somewhere in there because it takes time to train models. There's cost to do stuff. And what I want to be conscious of your time, and I know you're like us. You're always sort of on the forward edge of what's going on in the industry. What are some of the big things that you're thinking about as not only you plan out who you want to talk to in 23, but as you're doing workshops, as you're trying to train people, how are you thinking about 2023 as a whole in terms of both, what needs to be foundational for people, but also what's really kind of, got you looking ahead?
Yeah, I think no surprise, the generative AI stuff that we've spent this time talking about, particularly large language models like GPTN, let's say, ChatGPT, these kinds of systems, I think are super exciting because they make AI a lot more accessible. They, in a lot of ways, kind of unlock our ability to interact with AI creatively. And as we mentioned earlier, more so than ever before, it's very easy to see how you can apply these different tools to, or just speaking personally, how I can apply these different tools, in my business and kind of the things that I do. And so I'm looking forward to covering this space a lot more on the podcast, as well as, getting my hands dirty and, building some interesting things with them and putting them to use. I think rumor has it that OpenAI is releasing GPT-4 sometime this coming year. The spring is when folks are expecting it. And it will be very interesting to see what a GPT-4 powered ChatGPT looks like. Does it stop making shit up? I don't know. But overall, I think just kind of this moment in time and the accessibility of these tools, will serve to pull more people into the space and create more opportunities for folks. And I think that's a big part of what I get excited about, is just, seeing folks join and learn and get excited about trying this stuff out. At the same time, we need to continue to study the harms that these, technologies make possible, and, work to mitigate those, or at least raise awareness of those. So those are a few of the things that are on my mind. We'll also be doing a kind of a forward-looking trends predictions review series this month. So I would encourage folks to tune into that for deeper dives into some of the key areas like natural language and computer vision, reinforcement learning, generative AI, stuff like that.
Fantastic. That's awesome.
Good stuff. Yeah. Sometimes the shows get a little deep for us, but if you are interested in this, we cannot recommend Sam's show enough for folks. We try and cover it a little bit on this show, but if you are really into it, go spend some time each week with Sam's show. It is well worth your time. Aaron, this has been another good one. I feel like this is another one where we sort of get close to the end and we go, God, we could have gone 2 or 3 hours if if we wanted to dive into stuff. Why don't we wrap it up there? We can always bring Sam back during the middle of the year, because who knows, maybe GPT-4 now with less BS will be another mind bender, and we got to have him back on. But why don't you wrap it up and take us home?
Yeah, and so actually, Sam, I think we need to have you on mid-year no matter what, and we'll just have the BS test. Is it a better BSer or is it a less BS? Because it could go either way, right? The argument could be made that GPT-4 might be better at it.
That's right.
Hey, maybe it's not me. It's GPT-4, and I've trained it to sound like me.
That's right. That's right. So I definitely think we need to check back in and do an update on that one. So Sam, thank you very much for your time. On behalf of Brian and myself, thank you everyone for listening this week, and hope you are enjoying these look ahead shows. If you are, please tell a friend, please leave us a review, and we look forward to chatting with everyone again next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.